Vienna, 1848. Vivian Colborne tore the pearls from her neck and let them fall onto the Persian rug. The sound was muffled, like everything in that house. Like her voice had always been. Like her will had never mattered. From the half-open window came the faint murmur of a crowd, 300 guests waiting for the ceremony that would seal her fate. 300 witnesses to a lie dressed in satin and empty promises. She looked at the mirror one last time. The reflection staring back was a stranger, a pale face framed by French lace, eyes she barely recognized. When had she last chosen anything for herself? When had she stopped being Vivian Colborne and become merely Lord Hartwell's ward, the convenient bride, the elegant solution to an ambitious man's debts? Dominic Harcourt, Duke of Strathmere. She had repeated his name so many times it had lost all meaning. She knew him only from formal letters and 3 silent dinners where he seemed to study the wine more than her face. A man of perfect reputation. Vast fortune. Untouched heart, but Vivian didn't need his heart. She only needed enough courage to cross that window. Barefoot, she lifted her skirts with both hands. The garden stretched below, green, merciful, shimmering beneath the uncertain morning light. Beyond the iron gate, Vienna waited, vast, indifferent, free. She didn't look back. She simply jumped, and in the silence that followed, her veil fell like an unmade promise. While Vivian Colborne fled from a wedding that had never been hers, unaware that by leaving the altar, she had sealed her fate to a man who would never stop searching for her. The ground was cold beneath her bare feet. Vivian ran through the garden without looking back, her heart beat louder than the shouts already rising from the house. Satin tore against rose thorns. Her ankles bled, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She slipped through the side gate, always left ajar by the gardeners, and emerged into a narrow street of Vienna. The city was waking, indifferent, carriages rolling by, vendors shouting, women carrying baskets. No one paid attention to the young woman in a dirt-stained white gown, her hair unbound and wild. Leaning against a stone wall, Vivian finally allowed herself to breathe. What had she done? The question hit like a wave of cold water. She had abandoned a duke at the altar, shamed Lord Hartwell in front of the tun. In minutes, she had become the most scandalous woman in Vienna. But she was free. Her hands trembled. She had no money, no destination, only the gown on her back and the certainty that she would never return. She thought of her mother, buried under a headstone that read, "A devoted wife." She thought of every woman who had said yes when her heart was screaming no. Vivian lifted her chin. She needed to disappear. Vienna was large, but not large enough. She needed shelter, a false name, a place where no one would recognize her. Maybe her distant cousin in Salzburg, or that childhood friend who had married a merchant in Prague. But first, she had to leave the street before anyone recognized her. Gathering what was left of her dress, she started walking. She didn't yet know that. Running away was the easy part, that the real challenge would be living with the consequences of her courage, or that the man she had left waiting at the altar was not the kind to accept being forgotten. Before we continue this story of love and redemption, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next tales of passion, courage, and second chances. And tell me in the comments the city and country you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's return to Vivian and Dominic. Chapter 1. The Rain and the Name Left Behind. The rain began to fall just as Vivian reached the Ringstrasse. At first it was soft, hesitant drops that soon gathered into a steady curtain, blurring the outlines of the waking city. She tilted her face upward, letting the cold water wash away the garden's dust, the sweat of fear and the weight of being watched. Around her, people ran for shelter, into shops, into cafes. But she stood still, letting herself be drenched. Because for the first time in years, no one was telling her where to go. Freedom, she realized, had a bitter taste. Her feet ached. The silk of her gown clung heavily to her skin, and the hunger in her stomach had begun to whisper the truth she didn't want to face. Freedom was not the same as safety. She gazed through the windows lining the street, bakeries exhaling the scent of warm bread, patisseries where elegant women sipped chocolate from porcelain cups. Worlds she no longer belonged to. Had she ever belonged to them? The question came like a cruel echo. She pushed it aside. There was no time for regret. Night would fall soon, and she needed shelter before it did. Salzburg came to mind, a distant cousin she barely knew. Perhaps Prague, where an old friend of her mother had married a merchant. But she had no money, no name, and nowhere to go. Every door she could knock on was tied to Lord Hartwell, and Lord Hartwell would be furious. Then she saw it. A modest sign swinging in the rain, Pension Adler. The building looked humble, discreet, far from the grand hotels where nobility stayed. Vivian crossed the street, stepping over puddles, and pushed the door open. A small bell chimed above her head, soft but startling in the silence. The woman behind the counter looked up and froze. A soaked white dress, muddy bare feet, hair undone and dripping. Vivian must have looked like a ghost left out in the rain, but the woman said nothing. She simply waited. "I need a room," Vivian said, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "Please. Any luggage?" "No." "Money?" Vivian hesitated. Then, quietly, she unbuttoned the last remaining pearl at her wrist and placed it on the counter. Small, delicate, but real. The woman held it up to the light of a candle, studying its glow. For a heartbeat, Vivian thought she'd be turned away. Then the woman nodded. 3 nights. 3rd floor. "No questions," Vivian exhaled. "Thank you," she whispered. And something inside her, something heavy and long confined, finally cracked open. The room was tiny. A narrow bed, a single window overlooking an alleyway, a basin of water. Nothing more. Yet, when Vivian closed the door and leaned her back against it, she felt the faintest trace of safety. She walked to the window and looked outside. The rain was falling harder now, washing the streets clean, erasing footprints and carriage tracks alike. Somewhere out there, chaos was blooming. Lord Hartwell shouting, guests gasping, the priest left speechless before an empty aisle, and the Duke, Dominic Harcourt. Vivian shut her eyes. She had never truly known him, but she could imagine his expression, not of heartbreak, but of controlled fury. Men like him did not forgive public humiliation. Men like him did not forget, and for the first time since she had leapt from that window, Vivian felt real fear. Not for what she had done, but for what was still to come, because women who ran away were never simply allowed to vanish. They were hunted, judged, returned, and punishment was always harsher than the prison they had escaped. She stared at her reflection in the fogged glass. A ghost of a bride, a woman without a name, a runaway without a destination. She did not recognize the face looking back at her. But perhaps, she thought, with something between despair and a fragile kind of hope. That was precisely the point. To begin again, she would have to let the old self die. And Vivian Colborne, the obedient bride, no longer existed. Now she had to discover who would rise in her place. Chapter 2. The Art of Control. Dominic Harcourt was not a man who broke things. Control had been his first lesson. At 10, when his mother succumbed to an illness no physician could name, and he learned that grief and silence often walked hand in hand. At 16, when his father died and left him a title far too heavy for the shoulders of a boy. At 20, when he bought a stretch of indebted land and rebuilt it through sheer discipline. And at 25, when he finally understood the hardest truth of all, that not everything could be fixed with effort, but almost everything could be endured with control. Control. Always control. But when the butler whispered that the bride had vanished, something inside him cracked. He didn't throw anything. At 28, Dominic had long learned that rage was a luxury reserved for weaker men. He merely dismissed the guests with glacial courtesy, ignored the pitying looks and veiled amusement, and climbed the staircase alone, because witnesses made humiliation permanent. The veil lay draped over a chair, the white gloves abandoned beside it, and on the vanity a single note. "Forgive me, I can't." Dominic sat on the edge of the bed that would never be theirs. He held the paper between his fingers. The ink was smudged. From haste or from tears, he couldn't tell. But the meaning was unmistakable. Vivian Colborne had refused him. Publicly, definitively. Why? That question had haunted him for 5 days. He had offered stability, protection, one of England's oldest titles. He was not a cruel man. He didn't drink to excess or frequent brothels. He had paid Lord Hartwell's debts without charging ruinous interest. The arrangement had been mutually beneficial, sensible. So why run? Now, 5 days later, Dominic sat in his study in Vienna, the same one that once belonged to his mother, the Austrian countess whose estates he had managed since her death. He had come to Vienna 6 months earlier, at first for diplomatic reasons and to oversee his inherited lands. Then Hartwell, banished from London for debt, had proposed a match between his ward and the Duke of Strathmere. It had seemed convenient. Now, rain drummed against the tall windows. The city below blurred in gray light. On his desk lay a report from the investigator he'd hired. Discreet, efficient, expensive. The man had found traces of her. A modest boarding house near the Ringstrasse. A woman in a wedding dress seen wandering in the rain. She was still in Vienna. Hidden, but close. Dominic tapped his fingers on the mahogany desk. The sensible thing would be to let her go. Cancel the contract. Find another bride. Let the scandal fade. But something in him, pride, curiosity, or perhaps sheer obstinacy, refused the easy path. Vivian Colborne had challenged him. And Dominic Harcourt did not leave a challenge unanswered. The door opened without warning. Lord Hartwell burst in like a storm, face flushed, gestures wild, voice already raised. 5 days, Strathmere. 5 days and no sign of that ungrateful wretch. He threw his hat onto a chair. When I find her, I'll lock her in a convent until she learns obedience. Dominic looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. Sit down, Hartwell. I didn't come here to sit. The tone left no room for defiance. Hartwell obeyed, though he muttered under his breath. Dominic poured 2 glasses of brandy, a gesture of habit, not hospitality, but did not drink his. Your ward humiliated me publicly, Dominic began, voice calm and deliberate. 300 people witnessed my bride vanish minutes before the ceremony. My name is being whispered in every Viennese drawing room. He paused. But I don't hold her solely responsible. Hartwell blinked. What? How many times did we meet before the engagement? 3, 4? Dominic leaned forward. Arranged marriages require at least the illusion of consent. Did she ever give it? She had no choice. The debts, the reputation, her future. So you forced her. It wasn't a question. Hartwell opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsure. I thought she'd understand, he said weakly, that she'd be grateful. Marrying a man like you. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying him. Lord Hartwell wasn't evil. Just small. A man so ordinary he'd mistaken ambition for guardianship, self-interest for duty. And in that moment, Dominic understood. Vivian hadn't run from him. She'd run from the life Hartwell had built for her. From a future arranged, signed, and sealed without her voice. A strange feeling stirred in him, something he hadn't expected. Not anger, not humiliation. Something closer to admiration. She had done what few would ever dare, refuse the inevitable. Leave, Dominic said suddenly. Hartwell blinked. What? Leave, Hartwell. And don't return until I send for you. Hartwell hesitated, then left, muttering about disgrace and women without gratitude. When the door closed, Dominic rose and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. Vienna glimmered beneath a pale April sun, washed and indifferent. Somewhere beyond those streets she was hiding, frightened perhaps, alone, without money or allies. And suddenly his pursuit was no longer about wounded pride. It was something far more dangerous, Curiosity. Who was she really? The quiet girl from the formal dinners? Or the woman who'd had the courage to leap from a window? Dominic picked up the investigator's report and reread the last line. Pension Adler, 3rd floor. Window facing the alley, he memorized the address. Then he tossed the report into the fireplace, because when he found her, and he would, it would not be through intermediaries. It would be him, alone. And when that moment came, Dominic Harcourt would finally have his answers. Chapter 3. The Price of Freedom. 3 nights had passed too quickly. Mrs. Adler had been kind, but kindness had limits. Without payment, there would be no room. Without a room, no shelter. And Vienna, as Vivian had learned, was far too expensive a city for the invisible. Sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, she went over her dwindling options. She could ask for charity at the churches, but priests asked questions. She could look for work, but employers demanded references. She could write to her cousin in Salzburg, but letters left trails, and Lord Hartwell knew every one of her acquaintances. That left only one choice: disappear completely, become someone else, someone without a past, without a name, someone who did not have a torn wedding gown hidden beneath the bed. Vivian drew a long breath and made her decision. She descended the stairs with the posture drilled into her since childhood, back straight, chin high, hands neatly clasped. Mrs. Adler was behind the counter, bent over her worn ledger. "I need work," Vivian said plainly. "I can read, write, and sew. I play piano. I speak English, French, and German. I can teach children, organize a library, or assist with correspondence." The woman looked up, visibly startled. "A young lady like you? With that manner of speaking?" Vivian met her gaze. "A young lady like me," she said softly, "has no choices left, madam." Silence. Mrs. Adler studied her for a long moment, as though reading the story between her words. Then she nodded. "There is a family, an Austrian baron, newly arrived from Graz. They need a governess for their children." She hesitated. "But they'll ask for your name, your background." Vivian didn't blink. "My name is Margot Blanc. I'm French. Came to Vienna 2 years ago with an English family. They've since returned to London. I stayed." The lie slid from her tongue like something long rehearsed, natural, flawless. And perhaps in a way it had always existed within her. Maybe Vivian Colborne died a little more each time she said that name. And Margot Blanc, daughter of necessity, born of flight, came alive to take her place. Mrs. Adler tore a page from her ledger and wrote an address. "Residence Kessler. Go there in the morning. Mention my name. They'll take you." Vivian held the paper as though holding salvation. "Thank you." But when she climbed the stairs again, relief was short-lived. Through the window, she saw a black carriage stop in front of the boarding house. A golden crest gleamed on its door, discreet but unmistakable. Aristocracy. Her stomach tightened. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat. Even from a distance, even without seeing his face clearly, she recognized that posture. The easy authority of someone born to be obeyed. He entered the inn. Vivian froze. Then she stepped back from the window, heart pounding. Could it be Dominic? Had he found her already? She pressed her ear to the door. Voices drifted up from below, the deep timbre of a man's voice, Mrs. Adler's cautious replies. "Looking for a young lady. Dark hair. Wedding dress." Vivian closed her eyes. It was him. It had to be. But then she heard something unexpected. "Lord Hartwell offers a generous reward, 500 florins. Any information leading to the ward's whereabouts." Not Dominic. Worse. It was one of Hartwell's men, which meant the search was official now. She wasn't just a runaway bride. She was property stolen, an investment lost, a scandal to be silenced. Footsteps climbed the stairs. Vivian's mind raced. No exits except the door. She wrapped a shawl around her head, hiding her hair, opened the door quietly, stepped out, head bowed, like a maid on errands. She met the man in the corridor. He glanced at her. She kept her eyes on the floor and murmured, "Entschuldigen Sie," her German heavy with a foreign accent. Then she walked past him, steady but fast, down the stairs, out the door. Only when her feet touched the street did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands were trembling. Because she understood now, hiding would never be enough. Hartwell wouldn't stop. Men like him didn't forgive disobedience, and 500 florins could buy a great deal of loyalty in Vienna. Vivian walked aimlessly through the crowded streets. The late afternoon sun spilled between rooftops, golden, indifferent. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance, marking the hours that slipped away faster than courage could keep up. She reached a plaza where nobles took their evening strolls, women in embroidered gowns, men in polished top hats. Vivian lingered in the shadow of a colonnade, watching that glittering world from which she had exiled herself. And then she saw him, Dominic Harcourt. Across the square, speaking with another man, older, gray-mustached, diplomatic in bearing. They laughed at something. Dominic held a silver-handled cane, his movements composed, effortless. He looked entirely at ease, as though runaway brides were no more than minor inconveniences, easily forgotten. Something inside Vivian twisted. Anger? Envy? She couldn't tell. He didn't suffer. He didn't hide in shabby inns, or lie about his name, or fear being hunted. Because men like Dominic Harcourt never paid for their scandals. It was always the women who did. Vivienne turned away before he could see her, disappearing into the lengthening shadows of the evening. And as she walked back toward the boarding house, a bitter certainty settled in her chest. Her escape was not over. It had only just begun. And the Duke who had sworn to find her was closer than she imagined. Chapter 4. The Garden Encounter. Dominic hadn't expected to find her in that garden. He had come to Residence Kessler out of courtesy. Baron Ernst von Kessler was a useful political ally, newly arrived from Graz, and his dinner invitation could not politely be declined. The house, though modest compared to Vienna's palaces, had a quiet charm. Dark wood, Persian carpets, the scent of tobacco and old books. The Baron had greeted him with Germanic enthusiasm, introduced his nervous wife with fluttering hands, and apologized for the absence of their children. "They're in the garden with the new governess," he said cheerfully. "We finally found someone suitable. French, you know. A natural refinement." Dominic nodded politely. But the moment the words, French governess, newly hired, reached him, something in his mind sharpened. Coincidence? He doubted it. As the Baron launched into a long discourse on tariffs and diplomacy, Dominic's eyes drifted past him, toward the glass doors that opened to the inner garden. And there she was. A woman seated beneath a pear tree. A brown wool dress, plain but clean, her hair pinned into a severe bun. A book rested open on her lap. 2 children sat at her feet, listening intently. Vivienne. The recognition hit like a silent blow to the chest. He knew her by the curve of her neck, the way she held the book, too graceful for a servant, too careful for an aristocrat. She read aloud, animatedly, and the children laughed. He had never heard her laugh before. During the dinners before their engagement, she had been ghost-like, answering only when spoken to, smiling when required, existing somewhere between presence and absence. He had thought her timid, or indifferent, or simply empty. But there, in that quiet garden, she was alive. "Strathmere?" The Baron's voice broke his trance. "Are you well?" "Perfectly," Dominic replied, eyes still on the garden. "You said your governess is French?" Yes. Mademoiselle Blanc. Excellent references from Mrs. Adler, of the Adler boarding house. Arrived 2 days ago. Mrs. Adler. The boarding house from the investigator's report. Blanc. A false name, obviously. He could have exposed her right there, but that would have exposed him too. And something within him, curiosity, or perhaps something far more dangerous, wanted to watch her unseen. Dinner was an exquisite torture. He sat through the Baron's speeches and the ladies' nervous chatter, but his thoughts remained in the garden. Vivian didn't dine with her employers, of course. Governesses lived in the margins, ate in kitchens, slept in attics, existed halfway between family and servant. She had chosen this. Chosen servitude over marriage to him. He should have felt insulted. Instead, he felt something disturbingly close to fascination. After dinner, when the Baron went to fetch cigars, Dominic excused himself with a vague need for air. He crossed the drawing room and stepped into the garden. Night had fallen softly. The air carried the faint scent of blossoms he couldn't name. He walked the stone path until he saw her. Vivian sat on a small iron bench, the book still in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She looked up at the stars, her face caught in the lamplight, expression unreadable. Weariness, maybe, or relief, or something gentler. She didn't hear him approach. Dominic stopped a few steps away, studying her. No jewels, no silk, nothing of the woman who had once been meant to be a duchess. And yet, there was dignity in her stillness, in the way she held herself upright, in the quiet defiance that had survived everything else. "Good evening," Dominic said softly. She startled, then rose in one fluid motion, the book slipping from her hands. Their eyes met. Recognition, panic, and beneath both, defiance. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She didn't flee, didn't beg. She simply inclined her head in a polite, deliberate bow. "Good evening, Your Grace." Dominic bent to retrieve the fallen book, a treatise on child education, pages marked, notes scribbled in the margins. He handed it back to her. "Margot Blanc," he said, tasting the lie. "That's what you're calling yourself now?" "It's the name I was given at birth," she lied with serene precision. "And I," Dominic murmured, "am the King of Prussia." Almost, he saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips, but she stopped it before it could live. "You came to hand me over to Lord Hartwell, then?" she asked, voice steady. "Should I?" "I wouldn't expect otherwise." "Then why didn't you run when you saw me?" Silence. She looked down at her hands, small, pale, and already marked by work. "Because I'm tired of running," she said finally. "And because you would have found me anyway. Women in wedding dresses don't vanish quietly in Vienna." There was raw truth in her words, and resignation. But also something else, a quiet kind of courage he hadn't anticipated. He should have called for the Baron, should have summoned Hartwell, ended this farce. Instead, Dominic heard himself ask, "How much is the Baron paying you?" She blinked. 5 florins a month, plus food and lodging. Pitiful. "Freedom," she corrected softly. And in that small garden, Dominic Harcourt understood something fundamental. Vivian Colborne was not weak, she was desperate. And there was a world of difference between the two. "It was a pleasure seeing you again, Mademoiselle Blanc," he said finally, returning the book. Then he turned, walking back toward the house, leaving her under the pear tree, untouched, unclaimed. For now. Because Dominic had made his decision. He would not hand her over to Hartwell, but he would not let her slip away either. He would find out who she truly was, and only then would he decide what to do with the woman who had dared to refuse him, before the eyes of everyone. Chapter 5. The Price of Trust. Dominic began appearing with a disconcerting frequency. Not announced, not expected, simply present. The first time was 3 days after the encounter in the garden. Vivienne was teaching little Sophie a piano exercise when she heard that low, unmistakable voice in the drawing room. Her fingers faltered. The wrong note rang sharp through the air. "Mademoiselle Blanc? Are you all right?" the girl asked, puzzled. "Perfectly," Vivienne lied, rearranging the sheet music with trembling hands. Dominic didn't enter the music room. He simply dined with the Baron and left. But she felt his presence the way one feels a storm before the first drop of rain. The second time came a week later. Vivienne was walking the children to the park when she saw him sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper with far too much interest to be genuine. He looked up as she passed, touched the brim of his hat in silent greeting, and returned to his paper. But she could feel his gaze following her all the way down the path. By the third time, she was no longer surprised. She waited until the children were asleep and went down to the garden. He was there, as if waiting for a meeting she had never agreed to. Standing beneath the pear tree, hands in his pockets, eyes turned toward the crescent moon. "You're following me," Vivienne said bluntly. "I'm visiting a political ally," he replied with infuriating calm. "If our paths cross, that's merely coincidence." "Coincidences don't happen 5 times in 2 weeks, Your Grace." "Then perhaps I'm interested." The honesty startled her. "Interested? In what? Dragging me back?" "In understanding," Dominic said, turning to face her. "Why a woman of your education and birth would choose to raise another man's children instead of accepting a title others would kill for." "Because titles," Vivienne said quietly, "are cages. Golden, perhaps, but cages nonetheless." "And you prefer poverty to protection?" "I prefer choice to obedience." Silence stretched between them, soft, alive. Dominic studied her as if deciphering a forgotten language. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "I respect that," he said. "Even if I don't agree." Vivienne hadn't expected that. She had braced herself for anger, ridicule, threats, not respect. The word unsettled her more than any insult could have. Dominic stepped closer, then closer still. She instinctively moved back, but the pear tree stopped her retreat. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough for her to smell the faint scent of tobacco and leather, far enough not to be improper. "But you should know," he continued, voice lower now. "Hartwell hasn't given up. He's offering 500 florins for any information about you. And Vienna," he added, "is far too small for large secrets. Then why not deliver me and claim your reward?" "Because," Dominic said after a pause, choosing his words with care, "I find I no longer respect men who treat women as property to be bartered." The confession caught her off guard. Vivienne looked up, into dark green eyes serious in a way she had never seen before. There was sincerity there. And something far more dangerous. Genuine curiosity. "But you agreed to the marriage," she reminded him. "You negotiated my future like a transaction." "I did," Dominic admitted. "And that was my greatest mistake. Not because you ran and humiliated me before half of Vienna, but because I never asked if you wanted to run, or if you were happy with the bargain." The words lingered between them, part confession, part apology. Something in Vivienne's chest loosened. The small wall she had built against him cracked, just slightly. It was easy to flee from monsters. Harder to flee from a man willing to admit he was wrong. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. He didn't answer at once. Instead, he raised a hand slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and brushed his fingers lightly against the cuff of her sleeve, where the fabric was fraying from wear. "Because you deserve to know," he said softly, "that not all men are like Lord Hartwell." The touch lasted only seconds, but Vivienne felt it like fire. When he stepped back, she realized she had stopped breathing. "Good night, Mademoiselle Blanc." He left without looking back. And Vivian remained under the pear tree, heart pounding, hands shaking. Because she understood something terrifying. She was beginning to trust him. In the days that followed, Dominic kept appearing. But now, he brought books. "I thought you might enjoy this," he said the first time, handing her a volume of French poetry. "I saw you reading to the children. Thought your library could use a bit of variety." She accepted it reluctantly, fingertips brushing the leather binding. It was an expensive edition, nothing a governess should own. "I can't accept this." "You already have. It's in your hands." The next week, it was a treatise on modern pedagogy. Then, a collection of German folk tales. Always the same excuse. "I thought you might enjoy it." And she did. But more than the books, she began to enjoy their conversations. Dominic didn't speak only of politics or weather. He asked about the children, about her lessons, about her thoughts. And, more dangerously, he truly listened. One night she confessed, "When I was a child, I dreamed of traveling. Florence, Paris, Edinburgh, places I knew only from books." "And why didn't you?" "Women don't travel, my lord," Vivian said with quiet bitterness. "Women wait. They wait for marriages, permissions, lives that others design for them." Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My mother was Viennese. When she met my father, he promised her she would never live just one life. He took her to London, to Scotland, back to Vienna. She used to say marriage should never be a cage. It should be a door. Did he keep that promise? Until her last breath." Vivian looked at him and saw something she hadn't expected. Longing. Vulnerability. Humanity. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "So am I," Dominic replied. "But she taught me something worth keeping, that true love doesn't confine. It frees." The words hung between them, heavy, unspoken. Vivian felt her chest tighten because she understood what he meant. He was saying he would let her go, that he wouldn't cage her. But he was also saying something else, something she was too afraid to name. The candlelight flickered, casting gold over his features, the strong line of his jaw, the quiet eyes, the mouth that rarely smiled but somehow carried kindness at its corners. And Vivian realized, with a silent kind of dread, that she wanted to stay. Not for safety, not for comfort, but for him. And that terrified her more than any prison, because it meant she was losing the one thing she had sworn to protect. Her heart. Chapter 6. The Cost of Protection. Dominic knew he had made a mistake the moment he saw recognition in Lord Reginald Hartwell's eyes. It was late at night. Dominic was leaving Residence Kessler after yet another visit he had justified as diplomatic matters. Rain had begun to fall, fine, persistent, whispering against the cobblestones. He adjusted his coat when a voice cut through the drizzle. "Strathmere. What an extraordinary coincidence." Dominic turned slowly. Hartwell stood beneath the flickering glow of a lamppost, a black umbrella in hand, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Hartwell," Dominic greeted, coldly polite. "What brings you to this part of the city?" "I could ask the same." Hartwell stepped closer, deliberate, controlled. "Your 5th visit to Baron von Kessler's residence in 3 weeks. Impressive diplomatic devotion." The tone was casual, the threat beneath it, not. "The Baron is a valuable ally," Dominic replied evenly. "Indeed." Hartwell stopped 2 paces away. "I've been making inquiries of my own, hired informants. And you know what I discovered? A French governess arrived at the Baron's household 3 weeks ago, the very same time my ward disappeared." He tilted his head. "Curious, wouldn't you say?" Silence. The rain grew heavier, steady against the stone. Dominic's mind raced. Denial would be useless. Hartwell already suspected. The question was, did he know? "Vienna is full of French governesses," Dominic said. No doubt, Hartwell agreed, his smile sharpening. But how many receive weekly visits from an English duke? Your attentions, Strathmere, are rather revealing. Dominic forced his expression to remain still, though something inside him turned to ice. He saw the truth in an instant. His presence had betrayed her. His protection had exposed her. I don't have proof yet, Hartwell continued, watching every flicker of Dominic's face. But I will, and when I do, it won't matter how many dukes stand in her way. She'll be returned to where she belongs. She belongs to no one. The words slipped out before Dominic could stop them. Hartwell's smile widened, triumphant. Ah, so it's like that. He leaned forward slightly. You've just confirmed my suspicion, Strathmere, and now that I know you're involved, I'll watch every move you make, every visit, every trace. And the moment I confirm that the Baron's new governess is Vivian Colborne, no title in Europe will keep her from coming home. The threat hung between them like a drawn blade, and Dominic knew he was right. By law, Vivian was still Hartwell's ward until she turned 21 or married. Running away did not dissolve the guardianship. If Hartwell could prove her identity, he could drag her back by force, legally. Unless Dominic protected her publicly, but that would mean admitting everything. It would mean confessing that he was shielding the woman who had humiliated him before all of Vienna. It would make him a scandal, and her a target. And if he claimed her openly, every door in the city would know where she was. There would be no safety left. I'll find out the truth, Hartwell said. It may take days or weeks, but I'll find it. And when I do, you'll have to decide, Strathmere. Is she worth ruining your reputation for? Then he turned and vanished into the rain, leaving Dominic alone beneath the heavy night. He did not sleep. He remained in his study, watching the rain streak down the windows, searching for an escape that did not exist. Every option led to ruin. If he kept visiting her, Hartwell would have his proof. If he defended her publicly, he would expose her completely. If he confronted Hartwell with force, he would lose the one thing he valued most: control. And men who lost control lost power. There was only one way left. He had to walk away, completely, finally. It was the only way to erase the trail, to let suspicion fade for lack of evidence, to let Vivian become just another governess in a city full of them. Forgotten, invisible, safe. Dominic closed his eyes, the weight of the decision settling over him like stone. She would think he had abandoned her, that his protection had been a lie, that he was no different from the men she had fled. But it was the only way to keep Hartwell from finding her. At dawn, as the rain thinned into mist, Dominic wrote a letter to Baron von Kessler. Formal, restrained, claiming urgent diplomatic matters required his absence from Vienna for several weeks. He sealed it and sent it before he could change his mind. Then he hired a discreet watchman to keep an eye on the residence from afar, a man paid to report immediately if Hartwell appeared. Dominic would stay away, but he would still guard her, unseen. He would not visit. He would not speak to her. He would not let her know. Not until he was sure Hartwell had given up, or until he had no choice left. Because sometimes, Dominic realized with a bitter clarity, protecting someone meant letting them believe they'd been left behind. As the sun rose over Vienna, he stood at the window of his office, watching the light spill across the rooftops, toward the part of the city where he knew she was waking. Unaware that he had left her to save her. Unaware that he was waiting, silent and watchful, for the moment Hartwell finally made his move, and when he did, Dominic would be there. Chapter 7. Choice. Dominic stopped coming. On the first day, Vivian told herself he was busy. On the second, ill. By the third, she understood. He had left her. Just like that. No explanation. No goodbye. She kept teaching the children, French in the morning, Piano in the afternoon, stories at dusk. She kept smiling when the Baroness praised her work. She kept sleeping in the narrow attic room beneath the slanted roof where the rain tapped like quiet accusation. But something inside her had dried up. On the windowsill stood the rose she had picked and forgotten in a glass of water. Now it hung its head, petals yellowing, stem brittle. Every night she looked at it and recognized the obvious metaphor. A flower without water dies. A woman without hope withers. 10 days after Dominic's last visit, Lord Hartwell arrived. Vivian was in the garden with the children when she heard his voice in the front hall. Loud, imperious, unmistakable. Blood iced in her veins. The words on the page tangled under her gaze. Little Sophie tugged at her sleeve. "Mademoiselle? You look pale." "Keep reading," Vivian whispered, rising. "I'll be right back." She knew she wouldn't. She knew it was over. She slipped in through the side door and kept to the shadows of the corridor. Voices drifted from the salon, Hartwell demanding, the Baron hesitant, the Baroness nervous. The fragments struck like verdicts. My ward. Legal obligations. Hidden under a false name. Vivienne leaned against the cool wall and closed her eyes. She could run again, through the kitchen window, out the back, vanish into Vienna's streets. But to where? How long could she flee before they found her? She still had no money to disappear. And suddenly she understood something simple and final. She was tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of being Margot Blanc, a ghost without a past, a woman who did not fully exist. Tired of living as if existence were a crime. If she was to be taken, let it be with her chin lifted. She squared her shoulders, smoothed the plain wool dress, and walked into the salon. Hartwell turned. For a heartbeat, triumph flared in his eyes. Then came fury. "There you are," he spat. "At last." The Baron and Baroness looked between them, bewildered. Vivienne kept her voice steady. "Baron von Kessler, I owe you an explanation." "You owe him nothing," Hartwell snapped, stepping forward. "You owe me. Pack your things. We're leaving." "No." The word landed stronger than she expected. Hartwell froze, genuinely taken aback. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no," Vivienne repeated, lifting her chin. "I will not go with you. You have no choice. You are my ward, my legal—" "I am a person," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Not property. And I have chosen. I chose 3 weeks ago when I jumped from that window. I choose now again." "Choose?" Hartwell laughed without humor. "Do you imagine choices matter? That you may simply defy contracts, obligations, the natural order?" "Yes," Vivian said, "because the alternative is to die while still breathing. And I would rather die for real than live erased." Silence fell. Absolute. Even the Baroness, forever anxious, went still. And then a new voice came from the doorway. "She isn't going anywhere with you, Hartwell." Vivian turned so fast she twisted her ankle. Dominic stood on the threshold. Dark coat, hair slightly disordered as if he had run. In his eyes lay something she had never seen there before, cold fury and absolute resolve. "Strathmere," Hartwell hissed, the name an insult. "I thought you had agreed not to interfere." "I lied." He crossed the room, each step measured, a presence that filled the space. "You agreed to nothing," Hartwell sneered. "You merely slunk away like a coward." "I stepped away," Dominic said, low and dangerous, "because I believed it would keep her safe from you. My man told me you came today. So here I am." Vivian's heart hammered. Understanding washed through her. He had not abandoned her. He had withdrawn to protect her. And he was here now because she was in danger. "You have no right," Hartwell insisted. "She is my ward. And I," Dominic said with a fatal calm, "offer an alternative." He looked straight at Vivian. "Marry me." The world stopped. Vivian stared, unable to fit the words into sense. Hartwell spluttered. The Baron choked. The Baroness dropped her fan. "What?" Vivian breathed. "Marry me," Dominic repeated, taking a step toward her. "Not as it was arranged. Not because someone decided for you, because you choose it. Because I do." He stopped an arm's length away. "If you wish." "This is absurd," Hartwell exploded. "She humiliated you before all Vienna. She ran from the altar. And now you simply—" "Yes," Dominic cut in, eyes never leaving Vivian. "Because I have learned something essential. I would rather be married to a woman who once chose to refuse me than to a woman forced to accept me." Tears burned Vivian's eyes, not of grief, but of something larger and more frightening. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Dominic hesitated, then, softly. "Because in the last 4 weeks, I have learned more about you than in all those formal dinners. Because I watched you read to children as if each story mattered. Because you chose poverty over a gilded cage." He paused. "And because respect turns into something greater when we are not paying attention." The confession hung between them, raw, honest, terrifying. Vivian looked at the man who had offered protection without demanding obedience, who had stepped back to save her, who had returned when she needed him, who offered now not a prison, but a door. Then she looked at Hartwell, the man who had treated her as investment, a chess piece, a thing. The choice was obvious. Still, it frightened her. Saying yes meant believing, trusting, risking the heart she had sworn to guard. But Vivian was done protecting herself at the cost of living. "Yes," she said, steady despite the tears. "I accept." Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, relief washing through his features. When he opened them again, something new shone there. He held out his hand. She took it. Their fingers laced, and she understood the truth. She had fled a marriage, and now chosen one. The difference lived in a single word: choice. Hartwell, of course, did not accept defeat in silence. "This changes nothing," he shouted, face flushing. "She remains my ward until she turns 21. I must consent to any marriage, and I refuse. I already have another match in mind. Someone with a firm hand." "Then," Dominic said, glacially calm, releasing Vivian's hand only to draw an envelope from his inner pocket. "You may wish to reconsider." Hartwell frowned. "What is that?" "A full accounting of your debts," Dominic replied, opening the envelope and sliding out several papers. £3,000 to the Imperial Bank of Vienna, 1,500 to the Rothschilds, 800 to a moneylender in Leopoldstadt. He lifted his gaze. "Shall I continue?" Silence crashed down. Hartwell blanched. "How did you truly thought I wouldn't investigate?" Dominic tilted his head. A man who sells his ward as currency deserves careful attention. "I did not sell." "No?" Dominic stepped closer. "Then why negotiate her marriage while your debts strangled you? Why accept my advance, £5,000, which vanished quite miraculously in payments to your creditors?" The Baron coughed, embarrassed. The Baroness covered her mouth. Vivian looked from Dominic to Hartwell, comprehension settling like iron. "You never cared for my future," she whispered. "Only your accounts." Hartwell said nothing. He could not. "I have 2 options for you," Dominic went on, relentless. "First, I pay every debt you owe, every last shilling. In return, you sign total relinquishment of guardianship over Vivian Colborne. You leave Vienna. You never contact her again." "And the second?" Hartwell rasped. "I hand these papers to your creditors," Dominic said almost gently, "and inform them you attempted to defraud a marriage contract already paid for. The Rothschilds do not care for fraud." He paused. You are familiar with the debtor's prison here in Vienna, Hartwell? Silence thickened. Hartwell looked at Vivian, not with anger now, but something like despair. She held his gaze, steady. No pity. No forgiveness. Only resolve. Where do I sign? He said at last, defeated. Dominic drew out a new document, the deed of guardianship relinquishment, and set it upon the table. Here, he said, his voice final. Hartwell signed with trembling hands. Each stroke of ink, surrender. Each letter, defeat. When it was done, Dominic folded the paper carefully and tucked it away. Then, without a word, he opened his leather case and took out another document, the original contract, the one Hartwell and Dominic had signed long ago, trading Vivian as if she were merchandise. The Baron paled. Dominic studied the page a moment, like a man staring down a ghost. Then he lifted it, and tore. Chapter 8. The Open Door. The wedding would be in 3 days. Vivian stood in the guest room Dominic had arranged for her, not the chambers that would be hers after the ceremony, but a respectable room, well away from sharp eyes and sharper tongues. The window looked onto the garden of the house he had inherited from his mother in Vienna, and for the first time in weeks, she was not afraid to look out. She did not have to run anymore. On the bed lay the wedding gown. Not the other. That one had been abandoned, torn, lost. This dress was different. Simple, ivory silk, unburdened by borrowed pearls or other people's expectations. Dominic had said she could choose. Vivian had chosen lightness. She stepped to the mirror, not clouded like the one at the Adler boarding house, but clean and true, reflecting her without distortion. For the first time, she recognized the woman looking back. Not the obedient bride, not the frightened fugitive. Something between the two. A woman who had learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision made in spite of it. A knock at the door. She turned, expecting a maid. It was Dominic. He hesitated on the threshold, as if asking silent permission to enter. She nodded. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, leaving it resting ajar. Respect, always. I came to ask, he began, careful, if you're certain. Certain? That you want this, he said, approaching slowly. That you want to marry me. You have a choice, Vivian. You always will. I can arrange passage to wherever you wish. Enough money to begin again. Letters of reference. You needn't accept this simply because Hartwell. It isn't because of him, she said gently. Not anymore. Then why? The question was honest, unguarded. Vivian looked at the man before her, the one who had offered protection without demanding obedience, who had stepped away to keep her safe, who had returned when she needed him, who was now, even having prevailed, still asking whether she wanted to be here. Because you gave me something no one else ever did, she answered. Choice. And I choose you. Something eased in his eyes. Relief, perhaps. Gratitude. Or something deeper, which neither of them yet knew how to name. He held out his hand. She took it. And when their fingers twined, she felt not weight, but ease. 3 days, he said softly. Then you'll be a duchess. 3 days, she echoed. Then I'll be your wife. The difference was subtle, essential. Titles are cages. A marriage freely chosen is a door. Dominic had not expected to be nervous. But he was. Standing before his own mirror, adjusting his cravat for the 5th time, he noticed the tremor in his hands. Absurd. He had faced hostile parliaments, negotiated difficult treaties, salvaged estates on the edge of ruin. And yet, the thought of standing before Vivian in 3 days and promising her a life unsettled him. Not because he didn't want it, because he wanted it too much. What if he failed her? What if, despite good intentions, he became what Hartwell was, a man who controls instead of loves, A knock. His secretary entered with papers. Dominic signed mechanically, mind elsewhere. He thought of his mother, thought of the promise his father had made her, that marriage would be an open door, not a prison. He had always admired that vow. Only now did he understand its weight. True love is not possession. It is daily trust. A choice renewed. A door kept open even when closing it would be easier. Later, he walked into the garden. The very garden where he had first seen Vivian read to the children, where they had spoken beneath the pear tree, where he had almost confessed feelings he was only just learning to name. She was there, seated beneath the pear tree, book in her lap, the education treatise he had given her weeks ago. She lifted her eyes when she saw him and smiled. Not the polite smile of formal dinners. A real one, warm enough to reach her eyes. He sat beside her, leaving a proper measure of space. "Are you afraid?" she asked softly. "Terrified," he admitted. "So am I." The shared confession held its own comfort. Vivian closed the book and looked up into a sky the clear blue of early spring. "When I jumped from that window," she said, "I thought I was choosing freedom, but I discovered that freedom without direction is only another kind of prison." She turned to him. "And when you offered me marriage, I realized true freedom is not being alone. It is being with someone who lets you remain free while you are together." Dominic took her hand. No ring yet. That would come at the altar. Simply hand to hand, fingers laced, a quiet promise. "I am afraid of failing you," he confessed, "afraid of becoming what I swore not to be." "Then promise something different," Vivian said. "Don't promise perfection. Promise truth. Promise that when you err, you'll admit it. That when I err, you'll forgive. That we will build this together, not alone." He looked at the woman who had fled a marriage and now chose one. Who had learned courage by walking through fear. Who had taught him that love is not control, but mutual surrender. "I promise," he said. When he kissed her, not a kiss of possession, but a vow, Dominic understood something essential. She had not only saved herself when she ran, she had saved them both. She had forced him to ask what he had never asked, to hear what he had never listened to understand that only marriages built on choice endure. The sun drifted lower over Vienna, generous and gold, and beneath the pear tree where so much had begun, two solitary hearts found what neither expected. Not only love, but redemption.